Hello, I'm Greg with Brown Rights. Today we're going to address what is basically the only customer support call that we get with the competition primer seeder. You can see the CPS on the bench here, and I also have another one that I don't have mounted for the purposes of this video. The call that we get fairly frequently goes something like this. A customer will call and they will say that they cannot get their primers seated any deeper no matter how they set up the CPS. So they'll call and they'll say, I have the CPS set to its deepest possible place, and I still can't seat the primers any deeper. And obviously they're very upset because they think there's something wrong with the tool. Now, in every instance to date, the CPS that they've been working with is perfectly fine, and we eventually, throughout the course of the conversation, we get them to realize that they just need to pull harder on the handle. And so what happens is people pull down on this handle and they feel the anvil hit the bottom of the cup in their primer pocket, and then they stop. And they actually need to pull quite a lot harder on it. And so people, they do not realize just how hard those anvils are in those primers. The anvil seat in those primers is very, very solid. And it takes a tremendous amount of force to actually compress the anvil and compress it into the cup a little bit. So much so that it will, like if you do this on the regular, a lot of priming tools will actually be damaged and they will be destroyed if you try to do this for several thousand primers. The CPS has all of the strength in the world to seat those anvils as deep into the cup as you want. That's not always the correct thing to do, as performing a primer seating depth test and shooting that test is the best way to set your primer depths. It's important to know how to set the CPS up and how to use it to make sure that you're actually using the CPS the way that it was designed. There's an internal hard stop in the CPS, and when you hit that stop, that's it. I don't care how hard you pull on this handle, you will not be able to seat the primer any deeper than it is. Now, here are some common reasons why customers might be having some problems. The first one is these little screws in the shell holder retainer here. Now, what I recommend is just a finger tight, right? When I say finger tight, this is finger tight, folks. You put your little screwdriver in here and you just finger tight these things. I'm holding the screwdriver with my fingertips and just tightening it up a little bit. Now, in the manual, it says do not use a tool. It says just finger tight like this is what you do. Now, I had to put that in the instructions to do finger tight only, specifically because somebody thought it would be a good idea to use a DeWalt impact to tighten this thing up. Obviously, that is completely insane, but it is good to have them tight because otherwise, when you are doing cycles, it might loosen these things up, and that will cause the top to drift up, and it'll allow the shell holder to come up, and your primers won't be seated as deep as they need to be. The next most common thing we see is people will try to prime with the CPS, but they won't mount it down to the bench. They won't bolt it down. And they'll just, hold it like this and use it with their hand. So I'm going to set the CPS to its deepest setting. There it is, the bottom. And now we'll back it up just a couple of clicks. And I've got some 7 PRC primal cases here. Let's start with this one. And so it's set to its deepest setting. I'm just going to grab a CCI 250 off of this machine and put it in that one. And I'm going to prime this case. Obviously, I'm going to put my safety glasses on here. Okay, that's as hard as I can prime that by hand with the CPS not mounted. And you can see I've got the digital prime wear here, and so let's just take a measurement and see. Okay, we got it basically 2.5 thousandths below flush. And now I'm going to use the CPS that I have mounted to the bench rigidly. Okay, this thing is in the inline fabrication QD Ultra Mount plate. So I'd strongly recommend this if you don't have it already. These kits are awesome. They have CPS plates in stock most of the time, and they are an ordered item. It's not a special order deal, so you can just call up Inline Fab or go on their website, get the QD Ultra Mount that you want. These are the flush mount ones that I have routed into my bench, and the top plate for the CPS. The CPS bolts to the plate, and then you just install it into the ultra mount system. So I'm going to take this one that I've already seated, and we're going to reseat it. Now, this is not a good idea. Reseating primers is not something you want to do. You get one chance to put a primer in correctly, and that's the first time. And so if you try to make it deeper later, if you mess it up the first time, all it's going to do is introduce a bunch of non-uniform deformation into the primer. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull this tight against the hard stop at the setting that I have it for seating these. And then let's take a look at what our new depth is. So roughly 7 thousandths here, okay? We've seated it quite a lot deeper because I've pulled against the hard stop. I pulled as hard as I could on the CPS without it being mounted, but I couldn't get it seated any deeper than 2 thousandths below flush. Well, over here, I was able to put it much deeper. Now, let's just count in. There's 20 clicks. Now, let's take a look at this. Pulled good and hard on it, totally mashed this primer, and it deformed the rim of the case. I couldn't even hardly get the rim in there. And as you can see, we're almost 16 thousandths below flush. As you can see, the CPS has the power to put primers as deep as you could ever possibly want them into your brass, deeper than you would ever want them, actually. Now, because I pulled on that one so hard, it actually deformed the rim of the case. And so I'm going to set this one aside because we don't want that going with the rest of our batch. Let's just say that they do have the CPS attached rigidly to their bench, and they can, if they want to, pull on it as hard as they want. A shocking number of people will not believe me when I say that they are still not pulling on it hard enough. And so here's a little video that I put out some time ago on the YouTube channel to demonstrate this for those that were having trouble visualizing it.
Standing by your side with my heart on high drive. I'll do what it takes to make you believe. With my heart on high drive. We do what we want, but we're not free. With our hearts on hyperdrive.
As you can see here, I'm not a gigantic guy, but I'm not small either. I'm 6'1", 220 pounds, and fairly strong. And I am pulling on the CPS in that little video clip as hard as I can, so much that I'm lifting myself up off the chair. And so I don't recommend that you run it this way, but it's a demonstration to show you with no shadow of a doubt that you don't have to be worried about breaking the CPS unless you are a giant man. And even if you were, you get an appreciation for just exactly how much force you need to pull on this thing with eventually. As you prime cases, you'll start to feel some things. So I'm going to back this up to our original setting. Okay, so there I took 20 clicks out of it, and remember what we saw before. There I am pulling it down hard against the hard stop. And if you can see our measurement here, we're minus 6 thousandths, just a little over 6 thousandths. And that's the setting that I'm kind of shooting for, is, you know, between 5 and 6.5 thousandths is my desired setting for this particular batch of brass. And so there we've successfully primed a case. And if I were to do that again, running the machine deliberately like that, you can see we're in the ballpark for the same measurement. And you should generally see an extreme spread of maybe 1.5 thousandths, depending on the lot number of components that you're working with. Your brass, your primers will have different variants, obviously, and that's not really the focus of this video. The key here is that as long as these two screws are tight and the shell holder is pinched in there rigidly, and you have the CPS mounted to your bench, you will need to pull harder than you think on this handle. The amount of force it takes to overcome these anvil seats and these primers is extreme. So much so that even with this long lever that we have on here, on this handle, we had to come up with a elongated heavy-duty knob. So we have this long 5-inch billet aluminum knob that replaces the standard knob on the end of the handle to give you that much more leverage. And for our elderly customers, or some folks that maybe some of our military veterans that have an injury, this just makes it a lot easier to put the amount of force necessary into the machine to get that primer seated effectively every time, regardless of how much anvil crush you're looking to get. Now, when I just try to use the CPS that is not attached, I don't care who you are, just trying to hold on to this thing and prime like that, even if you had it on a small piece of wood and were trying to prime like that, the chances of you getting enough force into this machine to overcome the anvil seat is almost zero. It takes a tremendous amount of force. Now, because the CPS is so rigidly built, you'll actually be able to feel the anvil hit, and then you can feel the handle continue going and hit the hard stop. So you can feel, by the time you get maybe 3 to 4 thousandths of anvil compression, you can actually feel that movement and feel that compression in the handle when you're operating the machine. And so after a while, you'll feel how much force you need to be pulling on the handle with in order to make sure you overcome those anvil seats and get the amount of compression that you want. Obviously, if you're only going with roughly 2 thousandths of anvil crush, you might not be able to feel that exactly on those. Now, despite the fact that during the course of the phone call, some customers will start to believe me when I'm telling them that they're just not pulling on it hard enough, I still have to prove it to some folks, and this is how we do that. Most of the time they have the machine in its deepest setting already, and so I'll tell them to just take the primer out of the system, make sure that there's no primer on top of the priming pin or the priming ram in there, and I'll tell them to take an unprimed case and slide it into the shell holder. Then I'll tell them to pull the handle forward and just let it rest in the front position, and then I'll tell them to try to remove the case from the shell holder. Now, obviously, when I try to remove this case from the shell holder, I can't, because the priming pin is way up in the primer pocket. And so it's a physical impossibility that the priming pin be way up inside the pocket, so much so that you can't lift up and pull this case out, but yet somehow not be able to prime the case deep enough. And so with this little demonstration, I can generally convince most people that the CPS does indeed have as much depth as you would ever want. And the key thing is that you're just not pulling on it hard enough. So if you find yourself struggling, not being able to get enough force on the CPS, you can always jump on our website and order one of these big, giant billet aluminum knobs. And that will probably help you get a little more force on it. Meanwhile, if you're physically able, just lean on this thing. Now, another key factor is using your body correctly when you're trying to prime cases. Now, I have a lot of folks that, they have a low bench and they'll sit like this, and perhaps they'd even be standing and they're trying to use it like this, where they're pushing down with their arm, okay? So they're using their tricep and they're trying to push down like this, and that trying to push down is not very efficient. And so standing up above the CPS and pushing down, generally not a very good idea. You're going to fatigue your arm tremendously if you try to do that. And so a much better thing to do is to sit, but again, we don't want the CPS to meet us here. It'd be better to get the CPS at like chest height. So I've got these little rolly chairs that are pneumatic, and it allows me to get the CPS right about chest height. You can see here about how high this thing is. This allows me to pull on this thing, right? As if I was doing a pull-up. And that allows me to get a lot of force put into this handle. So I can get a case in here, and I can pull down, and I can do so abruptly. I can put my body weight into this thing. I don't have to worry about putting too much force on it, and I can lean, right? If I want to, I can lean back and yank on this thing. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that, folks. So I turned the phone kind of towards you guys a little bit here so you can see the numbers a little bit better. But the digital primeware here is linked via Bluetooth to my phone there. And we're going to take some readings off of the primed cases here. And so just to demonstrate that you can't really mess this up once you've got the CPS set up correctly, let's take this unprimed piece of brass here and let's get a primer in here. So that's about how hard I would normally pull on the machine. And we're just shy of 6 thousandths. Now I'm not going to cycle another primer in. Instead, I'm just going to pull on this one as hard as I can. Now, because I'm pulling on it so hard, the primer is probably going to go just a little bit deeper because realistically, there's all kinds of tolerance stacking in here, and the way that you operate the machine, you must operate it uniformly if you expect uniform results, and it's set up so you can operate it very uniformly. But from a safety perspective, you can see that we didn't push that thing very much deeper. That number is still very close to the same that we started. And so regardless of how you operate this thing, it's going to be very safe, so you can't over prime a case, okay? So don't be afraid of pulling hard on this tool, folks. It's designed like a bank vault. It's extraordinarily tough, yet you can feel everything that's going on in here because of how rigidly it is built. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope this will help some of you that may be having some problems priming your cases with the CPS to the depth that you want. Obviously, it's important to have a very good depth measurement system, and we have our primeware ecosystem on the online store portion of our website that you can check out if you'd like to measure your own primer depths and primer pocket depths and primers to the utmost level of precision. Once you have the CPS and the primeware ecosystem all set up, you should be able to prime your cases faster, easier, and more precise and accurate than anything else in the world. Primer seating depth does indeed matter quite a lot when it comes to making sure that your ammunition is going to be well matched to the ignition system in your rifle. That timing is kind of all that we're doing here on the reloading bench. We're trying to get the timing of our ammunition matched up perfectly to the most desirable timing condition in our rifle. Obviously, should you be having trouble with the CPS and you still can't get things figured out even after you watch this video, feel free to call us anytime at the number on our website, because the last thing that we want is for you to not know how to use this wonderful tool. So if you have any questions about the CPS, whether you're an existing owner or someone that's thinking about purchasing one, never hesitate to give us a call, and you can talk directly to me, and I'll take you through all of the various aspects of the CPS and hopefully answer any questions that you might have. But now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to sit here and prime this whole batch of 7 PRC primal cases.